Yeah.
Perfect.
So, hi everybody. For those of you that are coming in a little early, we're really pleased that you came back for round two, and hope things went pretty well this week with locating your bus stop coordinates and filling in some of that import-export file.
If someone does have a burning question, because we're going to answer it in today's session, feel free to put it into the chat and
We'll do
we'll
our best.
make sure that either by the end or we'll give you a roadmap to help answer that. We're going to, again, cover a fair amount of material. You'll be able to go back and watch this webinar at a later date once we post it. And then there are how-to videos that you can watch that also take this same information and walk you through. And we'll make sure
Ellen has
you,
a quick question, I hope. He just rose his hand, and I'm gonna unmute you, but we do have to
please.
keep it short because we are starting promptly at 2. Hopefully this works. You should be good to go. Calvin, you're still muted.
Oh, I didn't have a question. I don't know if I hit the.
Okay, well, that's fine. Well, since we have you, how did things go last week? Were you able to get your bus stops located and
We're still working on that. I still haven't got the data. I know where the data is. We're evacuated from our building, so we're kind of working from a remote area. So we're going back and forth and trying to collect data and stuff like that.
where were you out of?
We're at the main Navajo DOT office in San Benito. We're not in Fort Defiance yet.
Okay.
Yeah, we're trying to move back over there.
Okay. Well, good luck.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let us know how we can help. Certainly, we've got office hours tomorrow at 1, as we talked about last week. I'll put a link in the chat for that in a minute if something comes up.
Is last week's session available? Nancy, we've posted it to the webinar page for National RTAP.
Right, and I think the link to the recording was sent to everybody, Marcy. Yeah.
So Howard, if you're having difficulty finding it, reach out to me and we'll make sure you can, well, I'll make a note to resend that to you. Maybe sometimes links get pulled off.
I think it is posted as well as the PowerPoint. Yeah. So it's 2 o'clock and we are going to get started. I want to welcome everyone to our second training on the General Transit Feed Specification. Glad you're sticking with it and returned. My name's Nancy Doherty and I'm an analyst with National RTAP, same as last week. Marcy Jaffe will be our instructor for this week. And also joining us today representing FTA to instruct us on how to enter a GTFS feed into an NTD report at Jared McCarthy and Edward Eldridge. And you'll get to, well, they can say hello if they want real quick right now. But we'll be seeing them a little bit later in the hour. I do want to thank everyone who took a few minutes to complete the survey that popped up after last week's webinar. That's really helpful. There were a few comments about how fast the materials were presented. We do apologize, but there's a lot of material we need to cover in 3 hours, and we're doing the best we can. The good news is that this webinar, or a recording of last week's webinar, and this one eventually, is on our website, on the National RTAP website. And also we've got those 11 videos on our support page that basically mirror what we're doing last week, this week, and next week. And you can follow step by step, you can pause, you can type, you can unpause, and it's probably a little bit easier. But this gives you a really good overview of kind of the GTFS and GTFS builder. And also has been mentioned, we do provide a comprehensive guidebook, which will also walk you through the GTFS builder process. So last week, or next week, I wanted to say, Marcy will be diving deeper into validating data, and will demonstrate how to create a shapefile so your routes will display properly on a map like Google Maps. If you do your shapefile, your route won't display across a baseball field. It won't show the bus going across a pond. So we do highly recommend that you do attend next week's session where we'll be talking more about NTD. We'll be talking about the shapefiles, validating your data, making sure it's good and accurate, and then how to host it. But we'll be touching on all of those things a little bit this week. At this point, we do want you to have both your files open, both Excel files that comprise GTFS Builder, the schedule generator, and the import-export file. So moving on to our panelists or instructors for today. Very quickly, Marcy, who I introduced last week, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but she supports and guides rural and tribal intercity transit partners with technical assistance related to the General Transit Feed Specification, GTFS, and National RTAP's GTFS Builder. Jared McCarthy is a GIS analyst with Boyd Canton Group and is supporting the NTD program through the FTA. They're under contract to the FTA. He specializes in geospatial data, analysis, and cartography. He's a graduate from Tufts University, which is right down the road from me, actually, and holds a certificate in GIS. And in his free time, he enjoys gardening, hiking, and making music with friends. That's really cool. Joe Eldridge, who'll be here basically more to just answer questions and back up Jared, is a project manager for the NTD program support FTA contractor team. He's also with the Boyd Canton Group. He oversees a range of technical assistance and data validation services and holds an MS in data science and an MS in systems engineering from the University of Virginia. And he's been involved with public transit since 2009, so a very experienced person. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Marcy, who's going to walk you through the agenda and dig in. So Marcy?
Thank you, Nancy. And I want to start today's conversation with, you will not fail if you try. We will make sure you're successful. I can't put your bus stops on the map, but if you can do that and try to enter data, we'll get you to the other end and a successful NTD report. So today's conversation is about routes and trips, and we're going to go over it more than once. So you may not understand it the first time we explain it. Not to worry. You will, we hope, by the end of today's conversation. We're going to marry in the stops that you have to the schedule. That's how GTFS is generated. And we're going to generate a feed rather quickly today and talk about the web link. Next week, we'll do a deeper dive on those similar topics so that we can review them. But we'd like you to know that you can prepare one route all the way through at the end of today's conversation. For questions, please use the chat. Nancy will do her best to be replying as we go. In the event that today's conversation needs to be extended, join us tomorrow. We do have Thursday office hours. At the end of today's presentation, we'll make sure you have the link to tomorrow's Zoom, and it's on our website where it says Thursday office hours for GTFS Builder. And this will be available by the end of the week or early next week as a YouTube that you can watch. We're hoping, because we know how busy you get, that you're using the checklist. The checklist comes from the guidebook that you downloaded, and it's the back pages and allows you to say, yes, I finished all of this. I'm making good progress. And then you could go back and review any pieces that you need to. So we encourage you to use the checklist. So today, we're moving from where we were last week, which is agency, calendar, some of the attributes, overall attributes for your agency, to take the stops that you mapped, and we're going to do a quick run through how to get those stops into the Excel file, and then marry those stops to the schedule generator. And once we have those together, we'll generate a GTFS and the web link. So mymaps.google.com is what we suggested you use to view and create bus stops. There's a video. That's what the link is there in this, but you can't click right there. So just hang in there for a moment to see my maps, where you would create a new map. And this was mymaps.google.com. That's how I ended up here. And I want to create a new map. You might decide to organize your Google Drive with a folder. And this is the, bus stop for your agency. Right now, we're just walking through the piece where you're creating a new map. And we encourage you to notice in the base map that you have more imagery if you use this selection. And when you bring in this file, you might decide to name it. So, and the way you name the overall file is here, JTOC, bus stops. And if you had a list of bus stops, you might decide to import them. You might stop at Google Sheets and then import the file. We show you that in the video. If we're just going to create a bus stop, let's say we wanted to go to the Queets trading post, which is very near where we're going to have a bus stop, we would put something in the search bar, come in here, and then zoom in. I'm double clicking on the map. I can use the plus sign. If I wanted to create a bus stop at this location, I take the pin, I drop that pin in there, and we're going to call this Queets trading post, and just type that name in there so we know that everything isn't points 1, 2, 3. And I'm not going to create more than one bus stop right now. I'm just going to show you that from here, we export the untitled layer because I didn't happen to name it yet, or you might say these are my bus stops, download. It goes into the folder that you're working in, your GTFS builder folder. You say save, but more importantly, you save a step over here because the file will just open up by clicking on it and show me that data point that we created. And we have to stop in Google Earth because that's what's associated to the Excel file. And I just right click on this point, or I say on this globe, edit copy. And then I come over to my Excel files, which are over here. Just one second. And my Excel files, let me over here to the import export workbook, and I can double click on a blank row. A number 4 would allow me to post one or more than one lat long, and I just need to move that name here and begin to assign a stop ID. So we're going to do a little bit more with our stops today, but that was the 5-second version of mapping from last week. So we'll go back to the presentation, and our next topic for our learning today is trip groups. This is where we have the most challenge because it's hard to say it in words, but for those of you who work in transit all the time, you might go, oh, I know what you're talking about, just don't call it trip groups. Say that they are patterns or that they are bus stops for a route in order without any missing stops or blanks. So the way we think about it, and we mentioned it last week, you might have weekday service and weekend service, 2 separate trip groups. That makes sense because you turn on and off a trip group with your calendar and calendar dates based on when you have a holiday, and a holiday on a Saturday wouldn't apply to the weekday group. So we might have trips in the midday that are different. That will create a new trip groups. You just can't have any blanks. So the attributes that are assigned to a trip group include they have a route, and that route ID from your routes tab, service ID from your calendar tab, a direction ID that you're going to assign inbound, outbound, because it's going to create its own trip, and that the stops are consecutive. So just think about no blanks, and you'll be a superstar with regard to trip attributes that create a trip group. And then we're going to have a shape, the drawing of the route, that assigns to a trip group because it varies with those stops and stop orders. They all share the same attributes. So look at this screen with me. We have, and I've highlighted something because we're going to learn about that in another screen, but at the primary focus here is that we have 2 trip groups a weekday service with certain times, and then on Saturdays, we only go other times. 2 trip groups, same route ID. And so you're seeing that here in the route ID and the service ID changes, but the direction stays the same. Does
And
that,
the
go
stops
ahead.
are the same in this case.
In this case, the stops are the same.
So the only difference is the days of the week that the trip group is operated.
Correct. And the times for those times of day. So we are looking at 2 trip groups, but now the reason I've highlighted this is to plant the seed for you to think about. What if our operations team said, we're not going to whatever, we're not going to these 3 stops on the 3 o'clock trip. We need to create a new trip group, and that new trip group would look like this. Would allow us, there it is, would look like this. We would take the trip out of this trip group and move it down here. There would be no blanks anymore. We'll just go to the first 2 stops, the last stop. It's an express trip. And this creates 2 trip groups where in column A, we're going to name this separately because it's unique to the trip group. You can't have trip groups with the same name. The tools will squawk back at you. So let's continue with the conversation. And Nancy, we're going to be opening up a poll very soon.
Well, it's not a poll. This is a pop quiz. It's a training.
Okay. We want some active learning
We
here.
want to see if you understand trip groups. So take a look at this screen and then let us know how many trip groups you think we will need to create to represent this data. And I'm going to launch that right now. So we'll just give you a minute. Come on, we have 78 people here. Here we go.
Do your best.
Your
The
very
idea is
best.
that you won't be alone. Someone else will likely have that same answer, so not to worry. And then we'll explain how there
Right.
is one correct answer for.
All right, I think everyone who's gonna vote, oh, some people are changing their mind here. Oh, I see.
That's fine too.
Never mind, they're just, okay, got it. All right, I think we're gonna call it and I'm gonna end the
So
poll.
Nancy, do I have to release something for you to show it?
I'm sharing the results right now.
Okay, perfect.
Can you see them?
I can.
Good. So it looks like, if I'm not mistaken, a little less than half got it right.
And now let's look at how
Sorry
trip
about
groups
that.
are formed. It was a lot of data to look at, but we're just starting to get our mind around it. So look at trip group 1. These trips on weekday are the same, the 7 o'clock and the 3:35. The 2 o'clock trip goes one more place, so it's its own trip group. So we can agree there are 2. Saturday has its own service. It happens to be the same. So now we have 3 trip groups. I hope everyone's starting to nod their head that when you're organizing your data, you'll be able to create trip groups. This is not the last time we're going to talk about trip groups today. So
It's a
hang
tough
in.
concept, so we try to hit it a couple different times through the training.
And we're now going to create trip groups in our schedules V3 tab. So you have bus stops. They're in your stops tab. And now we're going to say, when does the bus go at that time to that bus stop? So here's an example that we're using for this particular map. We're going to digitize this map by taking what riders used to carry around in their pocket or print out or call you to have you mail them a copy. We're now saying, how can I take this 7:32, 11:37, 3:12 in the afternoon and make it digitized? We're going to be putting it into rows that associate the route ID, the service ID, days of the week, this direction ID. I'll explain that a little bit more, but what stop at what time. So you may already have this data one way organized, loink. If you have it in Excel and you just need to flip it, you probably can type all of that in about 2 seconds because you have the data. And that's one of the reasons we're working in Excel, hoping to save you some time. But we'll show you in a few minutes how to create the data if you didn't happen to have it organized that way. And you can see, I didn't take an arrow for every piece of data, but you're beginning to see that it's this data, bus stops, top to bottom is how we're going to organize the timetable, just not left to right. So Nancy, do you think there are any questions on where we are right now of what does it look like to look at data?
I do have one question.
Please.
I'm not sure it's you or maybe one of the other guests. We have an on-call weekend service to and from an airport each way and a ferry each way with efficient notice. How do I group these? Both have scheduled times. So it's an on-call, but they do have a scheduled time.
Okay. I'm happy to discuss it generically right now. There may be some extra finesse that you'll want in your GTFS later, but on-call service can be in there with schedules. As you say, there are bus stops, and we're going to group the airporter and the ferry and the whatever as routes that'll have a route ID. They need to have something in here that defines them. And then the route ID tells the rider whether they're getting on a boat or a bus. And once you're organizing your data, you can say that the rider must call for a pickup, and we'll show you how to do that, but that's not our focus as much today. Mostly it's the scheduled service where there aren't any extra requirements, but it is possible in GTFS to make sure the rider knows to call.
Allison has a question to all of us, and she does reference the workaround, which we'll hit on next week.
That will be next week for the more on-demand service. So thank you, Allison, for wanting to get us to that next step. We've got to build out our data first to then show how it could be published as Flex routes online until that Flex goes live. So converting a timetable, what you need, your route with that route ID, the stops with a stop ID, and we didn't talk about how to create that, but you will be able to organize a stop ID by a code or by words. It's up to you. We'll look at that today. And the timetable. It's on your website. Maybe you want it printed, and then you're going to be working on converting the timetable for a trip that's weekday or weekend, whatever's best for you.
We touched upon creating or just giving a stop an ID or a route an ID. We touched upon that last week. You can name the IDs whatever you want. You just got to remember them because you're going to need to refer to them in this next part that we're working on.
Yes. And there's a stop code for those who are advanced who want to think about whether the public's going to punch something into their phone. That's public facing. The stop ID is private to your data that you, as the GTFS expert, will assign. Thank you for that, Nancy. And here is our guidebook. So you'll want to, flip to those pages, schedule generator, and become more familiar with the steps and the data that we're going to be organizing. So we're focusing on the Schedules V3 tab right now. And we're going to go into our actual demonstration. And the demonstration of our schedules workbook is here. And we might want to just work on each row. I'll just make the other data go away for us and focus on the row that we're in. And in this row, we're going to create the trip group. And the trip group will be a name that you assign outbound, inbound, route 3, route 7, something like that would be fine for the trip group. Everything else right now in that row stays blank until you get to this wheelchair accessible and bicycles allowed. So those two pieces of data are going to make up the attributes for this entire trip group. Most of us at a federally funded transit system would say, yes, I have wheelchairs that allow me, riders can get on a wheelchair for this trip group. We're not saying whether the bus stop itself is accessible. That's somewhere else. We're focused on whether the bus that's going to be driving has available wheelchair securement for riders. And with regard to, and you could leave this blank, but it doesn't help riders if you do have wheelchair accessibility to not tell them that. With regard to bicycles, again, you could leave it blank and then it's vague, but it's a number 1. If you have a device on your bus, it's a number 2. If you do not offer a bicycle accessible way to put the bike on a rack or bring the bike inside of the bus. So please fill this out. It helps riders that are, multimodal coming to you with bikes. With regard to these trip groups, on this row, we would be putting in our shape ID. So whichever shape ID we'll be assigning next week, it would go here on the row that builds the trip group. So now let's turn on the next bit of data for the data set that we're going to work on that you're creating. If the route ID is here, that's going to come from our import-export workbook, and it's this tab named routes. And let's go right here. It's right here in routes. 1 second. And the routes tab has a route ID, the agency ID, and the attribute that it's a bus, not a ferry or something else. So the routes tab in our workbook will have JTOC, that was from the routes tab. The service ID is coming again from the import-export workbook in the service ID column. And this idea of direction ID is so that the data can get organized inbound, outbound. So a 0 is going to say that this is a trip outbound, and soon we'll build the number 1 for trips that are inbound. The head sign is the direction that we're going. So it may not literally be what the rider sees at the top of the head sign. For GTFS, you could use that, but really we don't need to say that it's route JTOC, we know that. We don't need to say that it's blue. It's going to be in the routes attributes that tell us it's blue or it's route 3. So we really want to show what destination we're going to. Often the last stop would be our trip head sign for GTFS. And our stop, go ahead, Nancy.
We do have a question about, I think your line 2, where you're kind of defining the trip group. The cells under the column header wheelchair accessible are formatted as text. Is that by design? Is there a reason for that?
Oh, great question. Thank you. Yes. We don't want Excel to be too helpful. We want to be sure you're only entering a 0, 1, or 2, and just leave it as formatted as text. You could put a number in there. It shouldn't harm anything, but we're trying to make sure that if you did put in something else, it reminds you that we just need it to be a simple digit.
And as a reminder, everything gets exported into a text file anyway, when we're at the end.
Okay. So we've connected that timetable that we saw, your timetable. We're hoping you're starting to enter some of your data into this second row, but we're going to go through it one more cell at a time. So we've got the route ID, the service ID, the direction, head sign, stop. And that stop ID is also coming from the import-export group. Right here is the stop ID. And that's the name for this. That's the ID that goes with the stop name. And in this column, next to stop name, is called stop head sign. And the stop head sign is giving us a chance. Let me just move this over a little bit so it's even less confusing to you. The stop head sign is saying, what's the next stop that we're going to go to? So if the riders are looking left, looking right, and they know their community, they'd say, gee, I shouldn't be going on a bus that's going north. I'm trying to go south. So stop head sign is literally equals the cell down and below. And I'm just showing it because we have the data in there. And now the rider will know what direction we're going. It's not literally that there's a new stop head sign that you're going to create on your bus for every stop that you go to. It's how to make it easier for the rider to know north or south or east or west.
This is on the, you'll see this on the trip plan. You're not going to necessarily see it on the bus. It's
Thank you.
confusing where it's
That
called head
helps
sign, and
explain
that
it.
confuses me. So I just want to make sure everyone gets that. It's what they'll see when they're looking at Google Maps or Apple Maps.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
We've got a pickup type, a drop-off type. This would answer the question of, gee, the rider must call, and that would be a number 2. Again, refer to your guidebook where this might be helpful. You could say, no, we do not stop at this bus stop because we're going to come express through there. But each trip in this trip group would not stop there if you exclude the trip. So continuous pickup and drop off, we were very hopeful that that would be used. It's not being used right now. And is this going to be a timed stop? Yes. If it's the first trip of the trip group, the last trip of the trip group, it needs to be a timed stop. It can't be calculated or estimated. Wait time allows the trip, that stop to keep on for the rider to wait 5 minutes or 10 minutes while there's a break or picking up someone. We'll explain that more in the guidebook, but it's available that you can have a wait time at the stop. So that time point is right there, and that time point gets picked up for these times as they're on my schedule. The driver will not leave before that. So if I want to put together this entire block of data, instead of watching me type it in, this is how I would get a group of data for one trip group related to this particular data set. And Nancy, I'm going to need to keep moving a little bit, but I think as we go through this process one more time, or someone watches the video, and you might want to put that into the chat, that the video from our support page is available to assist that person to slow this down and watch how this data goes in.
I'm going to put the link in just the schedules video. So that video goes in, does a deep dive into what Marcy just showed you in 5 minutes.
So the stop here at Clearwater, if we decide that in operations, we're just not sure. Sometimes we run a little early, sometimes we run a little late, but the time that we're going to get there is between 8:02 and 8:27. We're showing you that the asterisk or star is used to estimate the time, and that time point is a 0. So just remember, you don't have to have time points for every stop along the way, but you do want to put an asterisk, not a blank, when you're going to hold that trip together. So I have created one trip group, and now I want to show you what happens if I create another trip group. And in this trip group, we might have that variation that we were talking about before of, or this might be the other direction, excuse me. I want to show how direction ID flips the trip for inbound and outbound. So we arrive here, we give our driver 10, 15 minutes, and then we're going to leave that same location and head back north. Does it make sense that we would have 2 trip groups for outbound and inbound, and direction ID is what helps us see those separations?
So this is all the same route, but different schedules or different directions.
And now you don't literally need to type in the word leave a blank between trip groups, but we're visually trying to help you realize the minute any row hits a blank in that column, that trip is over. So if I innocently forget and leave that as a blank, 8:02 is the last stop on that particular trip group. Does that make some sense as you're thinking about how to create trip groups? So we've got Saturday service, where it's different times than weekday service, but the stops are in the same stop order because we're using the same route. So I might have copied and pasted all of this down here and then modified the times. You
And
see,
And change the calendar ID.
And
to
change the
Saturday.
calendar ID. We're highlighting that. And most important, if I copy that same trip group down, it's going to say that you have a duplicate and we don't know how to manage trip groups that have the same name when they're probably separate trip groups.
That comes up when you validate, right? You won't know that you have a problem until you validate the data, or is that not true?
Well, we're trying to set into the new version of the single workbook a reminder that if you have any
Oh.
duplicates here,
Oh, yeah.
that you'll see a highlight in color that those trip groups are the same. So we're doing what we can inside of our Excel workbooks for
Okay,
you
did we talk about that there's a second version of GTFS Builder, which it's one spreadsheet instead of two.
correct.
So the Schedule V3 is now a tab inside the GTFS Builder.
So if any of you don't have that, reach out. We'll make sure that it's available to you. We've been trying to email it to you. Maybe if your email stripped it off, you didn't see it yet, but we can get that to you and encourage you to use the single workbook. So here is an idea where you might have hourly service for your bus. So again, this may not be the data on the specific file that we're working on matching up, but just we'd like you to see how easy it will be to take a 7 o'clock time. And we've got our first times for this particular sample route. And if I use a feature called equals time, and I'm adding R3 to time, and I'm saying add an hour. So I'm hoping you can see this here or watch it in the video. It's saying 1 hour, 0 minutes, 0 seconds. And I pull this to the right and I pull this down. I've now made an hourly timetable and I could keep going until 8 at night. Minutes, seconds for you to create your timetable, as long as that pattern stays the same and that it's hourly. And what if it were half hourly? This is a 30-minute interval. I'm just going to pull to the right. And then I might say I'm going to copy that particular series or that data down to this other stop that has a time. If they don't have times, you could use a find and replace all of your blanks in a section with the star. But you do need to remember that every trip group holds together with the asterisk if you're not going to have a time in there and you're going to say it's a non-time point and identify that with a 0.
Those would be like flag stops, right? Or not necessarily.
No, not necessarily. They absolutely could be flag stops, but there might be some people who are generating GTFS that don't have information about exactly what time it's going to get to Cedar Creek.
Okay.
So it's on the schedule or it's not even shown on the schedule. It is a regular stop and riders are going to get picked up. We in operations know it, but the person doing GTFS doesn't. And so you can use a star instead. It may relate to a flag stop, doesn't have to. So the last part of our trip group conversation is looking at this idea that this particular bit of data, the operations team came to us and said, we're no longer going to certain stops, the ones in yellow. So we're going to create another trip group, take the first times and the last time, and move them down here. And that's going to create a whole separate trip group as well. So I'm hoping that you're gaining some confidence. You may not have been able to create all your trip groups for all this particular route, all of the route that you're building, but we've planted the seed and you can come back to watch this. So Nancy, I think we're going to just show one more step here in our slideshow, how to take the data that would be in Schedules Generator if you have 2 books, or Schedule Generator as a tab, and you're going to generate a GTFS, and then we'll compress it and create the GTFS that you're going to need. We're going to come back to this more next week, but these are the steps that we will use. And after Jared helps us with why we want this web link of the GTFS, we'll show you all the steps all the way through. So Jared, I'm going to control the slides for you, excuse me. And Oh, I'll say one more piece. Once you have your GTFS, you are going to drag and drop it into this validator. It's a literal drag and drop, and it will give us any warnings or advisories that we need to attend to in order to create a valid file. And next week, we're going to do a much deeper dive on a variety of validation issues. And you're going to resolve errors and look at the warnings.
Okay, can we just clarify a couple things before Jared, if you don't mind, because it's on Marcy's topic. Andrea writes, I'm confused about inbound and outbound. Does each route have an inbound and outbound at the halfway mark?
It's a really good question because you could decide to draw the route as a loop. We encourage you to go inbound, outbound, because when you decide to map that route, if you go to the same place more than once, it gets a little trickier. You can do it as a loop, but we highly encourage the inbound, outbound. And if you're not going to get to shapes right now, you could probably get away with loop routes.
If
So,
you do a loop,
excellent question.
If you do a
Go ahead,
loop, is it a different number that you put in under the
It's a
direction?
zero.
It's
Just a zero.
Okay.
All the way through. And you would not want 0 at the top, 1 at the bottom for an inbound, outbound within a trip group. You want to keep a trip group the same. And for a loop, it could be a 0.
Okay.
So validation will be a deeper dive next week. And we need all of you to know that you can get an NTD A+ if you follow Jared's instruction. So Jared, please join us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the intro, Marcy and Nancy. I appreciate that. So myself and Joseph Eldridge, we work for an FTA contractor, and we're in charge of validating and getting data from you all into NTD, into the National Transit Database. And so we want to start with first, who is going to be submitting GTFS data to FTA, applicability. If you operate a fixed route or deviated fixed route service, either directly or contractually, and submit service data to NTD annually, you'll be submitting GTFS data, which I assume, Marcy, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I assume that's everyone on the call. Good assumption.
That's how I know it. Yeah.
Cool. So the first year, you'll submit a publicly hosted web link, which we'll get into more as we go, what that is. And year 2 and going forward, you don't have to recreate your GTFS data. You just have to update the data with what changed over the year. Maybe you added a stop, a new route, maybe a route goes a different way. And the person that's designated as your CEO will certify that the data is up to date. So where do you put this data? You'll put it in the P50 form, which is an Appian. You'll do what Marcy just went over, which is validate the GTFS feed using the mobility data GTFS validator. That'll output basically an error list, and you can go back and fix that. And Marcy, I believe, will demonstrate that next week. So once you have valid GTFS data, you'll upload a valid data to a stable URL, which RTAP is going to help you build. URL, as you can see in green below, it's just the classic thing that you see in the tab bar in Google, HTTPS, and then a long string of letters, some of which make sense, some of which don't. Valid web links, the kind that we're looking for, are going to end in .zip or .ashx in most cases. The ones that RTAP hosts, which you'll be making with Marcy, she's helpfully going over that with her cursor. You can see it ends in a .zip. And we validate these web links to make sure that when they're clicked on, they'll automatically download data. And the best way to know if it will automatically download data is to see if there's a .zip. As a little note, we found if there's a period at the end of the .zip, it won't work. The computer won't understand what's going on. And so as a quick check right before you submit it in the P50, make sure there's no period at the end.
And we'll actually show you next week running your link through the validator, which would be the same process that your analyst would be following. And we want to save you a phone call back from the analyst saying, where did that period come from? It shouldn't be at the end. Fantastic. Jared, keep going.
Cool. So in the top right page in Appian, you're going to see the kind of waffle iron looking thing. And you'll click on that, and there'll be a helpful GTFS tab, General Transit Feed Specification. You'll go to that, and this will bring you to where you'll submit the web link that you'll make through this webinar series. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to put in your NTD ID under organization. This is the number that you'll either know or can easily find out. It's just a string of, I think, 5 numbers that are unique to your reporter. Stealing the idea of the waffle iron. Thank you, Chelsea. You can. So yeah, that's step 1 is enter the NTD ID. Step 2, you're going to enter in the mode and the types of service of the data represented in your web link. So this is going to automatically populate from your P20 form. So if you have bus modes that are directly operated, both of those will be in the drop-down menus. And so you'll be able to select those and enter in the web link that corresponds to those modes.
I need to add something because I think the questions come up for us. If someone has multiple modes, they might purchase some service or they run the bus and the ferry. Can they use the same web link if their GTFS includes all of the modes in that web link?
Yeah, good question. So long as the web link has the data that's represented by what's in the drop-down menu, so as long as it has bus direct operated and is a web link for that, then yes. So to put it differently, so long as the data that you're trying to represent is in the web link, you're good.
And you might have to put it on 2 or 3 different lines if you have different modes when you have a drop down. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
correct.
We don't want you to miss when you're so close to the home base that it was omitted. Okay, fantastic. What's next?
So the next part is the kind of the final step. It's the D10. This is where the designated CEO will certify the GTFS web link that it's up to date at the time of certification. You might have to coordinate with you and your CEO or the CEO delegate that is certifying the report, and they will have this on their screen and they'll be able to say, yes, this is up to date. I think it's just a box that they check.
So so I think in rural transit, we have transit managers that are probably completing the report or entering the report rather than a CEO. I could be wrong, but but if there was someone that was helping them, they would have to work together to complete this part of the form.
Yeah, that's correct. To make sure that that the web link is up to date, and so long as whoever's designated as CEO, it probably isn't in the actual job title. But it's whoever is designated as CEO will be able to do that.
I'm noticing it now, Nancy, and everyone who stares at this much more than I. It's the CEO certification. And this is certifying many other things. It just happens that the D10 is specific to the GTFS. And we don't want a lot of explanations that you're still thinking about it. We want you to be successful. You don't need any more qualification. It's a valid GTFS file that's going in here. But if you did have a note that you wanted the analyst or someone to see, there is a box for it. And that box isn't going away, right? Joe or Jared?
Oh, that's right. That'll be there for a while.
Okay, fantastic. Nancy, you're guiding us in terms of anyone who couldn't follow our next high-speed chase through how to get a successful GTFS file, which we're going to show you in a moment, into the P50 and get your leader to say, yes, it's valid as well.
I think we're good. I don't see any questions. Joe's just put something in the chat folks might want to take a look at about the 5-digit NTD if you need help with that.
Ideally, if you've gotten this far, you probably have deep in your mind
You've
somewhere
gotten
your
a waiver or
NTD ID,
whatnot.
but
Yeah, but
we
still,
don't want
it's-
that to be a holdup. And
Right.
generally, your data is somewhere else once you're already in the NTD experience. So
Okay, well, he did put that in the chat if anyone needs help with that.
Fabulous.
So,
okay.
Yes, thank you.
who to reach out
So-
to.
I'm now going to create the file and then upload it as a web link. And that's what we'll do in this next portion of our review and learning together.
Marcy,
So-
can I ask you a question? Did we convert the into the time? Did we convert the schedule V3 into stop times and Isn't that like one more step we have to do?
We haven't done that yet. We were
Okay.
just giving everyone some confidence, a few minutes to try to enter some of their data while we're listening to how this works. And then once we have some confidence in that, we are going to create what's called stop times and trips, because if that data comes in like this, the GTFS won't understand it. So we would go to our notes tab, and in the 2 workbook version, we would clear all. And so nothing is in here. We're not overwriting any data that we might have wanted. We're starting fresh, and we're going to generate the stop times and trips that takes the first stop at 7:32 and says we arrive here, we depart here, what is the stop, and what's the next stop. So try not to get confused when you look at this row, in case you think, that's not when I go to Cedar Creek, that was the time ahead. Just be aware how stop head sign is its next stop, and that time point is associating with times that we have in our schedule, and a blank will tell us that the Clearwater stop, that next stop, is just untimed and the time point is 0. And I think the other piece that starts to look a little scary, but you generated it, it's your trip ID. And so these are the trips within this trip group. There were 4, and they were coming from here to generate the stop times and trips right there.
So how many hours of typing do you think that little macro saves?
Oh, we've seen 20, 30,000 rows of data
Yeah,
out of here that
terrific.
you would otherwise be typing in yourself. We do not want to do that. And I can make the quick comment that Excel wants to be helpful. Some of your agencies may have service after midnight. And so we need to keep these underscores in there so that the clock doesn't go back to 1 o'clock when we want 2,500 after midnight. So again, don't touch if you don't have to. Just keep it as it goes. And here are each of the trip groups that are saying, for this particular Monday through Friday service, if we have to have a holiday, these are the trips in that route that are going to be affected by the days that we no longer have service on weekdays. So we just take this stop times, we copy it into our import export workbook and drop it in here. I guess I've been practicing, so I'm just going to drop it in for stop times, and I'm also going to drop it in for trips. So I can just take the whole workbook, even if you can't see column A, it's the whole workbook to the left of A and above 1 that can easily be brought into the import export workbook, and you can only drop this into A1. The Excel file says that's the only place I'll let you bring some new data in. And now that we have data ready to go, we've filled in our agency tab, all of these pieces, we will be ready to generate a GTFS. So from the notes tab, we choose the green button that allows us to go into a feed folder. And what this, you can't read it, but it's saying, hey, you don't have a feed folder. I'm going to create one for you. The idea is that the files that we're going to generate, and it's saying, if you had old data, we're going to overwrite it. And we're going to say yes to all of these advisories. The process is complete. And inside of our workbook for GTFS
Marcy,
Builder,
this folder will be created, the feed folder will be created in the same folder that GTFS Builder is located, so you know where to find
steal
it.
my thunder, why don't you?
Oh, sorry, sorry.
I love it, Nancy. We do work well together. So yes, we've been working in our GTFS Builder folder. This Excel file is going to stay, the new file that folder that we just created is going to stay within that zone. And so if you needed to know that we just created it at this time and it isn't yesterday's news, please look at that. And now we're going to select all, because now we've got to zip together. This idea that Jared was explaining, we need a zipped data file for the GTFS. And I can use the 3 dots or a right click, and I'm going to compress that into this is my GTFS. I'm going to change the name later, but for today's process, while you're practicing and using our validation process, you're going to just leave it as a name until we're at the end of the game and you're really confident that there are no errors. And we're going to take the
Marcy,
file.
can I
Yep.
just reiterate that every tab in the import-export file is made into a text file, and that's what you're looking at. You should start to see that each one of those represents one of those tabs we worked in. Okay.
Good reminder. Again, it's obvious to me that I've seen it as a text file, but if we wanted to just see what routes look like,
Yeah.
and
But that's where
but
it's
you're not going to
coming
come in
from.
here and need to edit this. It's what you need for a GTFS. It's coming out of those colored tabs that you've been filling in. Fantastic. So we have our validator. We have our feed to validate. And this is a zipped file. We're going to drag and drop it here onto the validator, and we're going to open up the report. I left something in here just so that you could see how you touch these plus signs to read through. Is this an error? Is this a warning? And in this particular case, it's telling me one place I have the field as JTOC and it's not matching what's in the Fares tab for JTOC. It doesn't matter right now what these specific details are. You would go read through it, do your best to understand it. We'll be here to help and interpret for you. And you would go through and correct any errors and then run it through again by just generate a GTFS with those corrections made. So this was a little bit high speed. Nancy, I think we have the reminder. There's a nice video that allows you to go all the way, all the steps through to creating a GTFS. You don't have to watch 3 different videos, just watch that summary video. And that should help you with how to get to creating a web link. And you would come to our upload page at National RTAP and take that file and upload it. We're going to go into this in more detail next week. But for those of you superstar GTFSers, you might decide you want to practice and see what happens. And if you have a web link, you could, we just wanted to show you, you could test that web link on this portion of the validator to make sure there is no extra dot or 2 dots or an error in your web link. Nancy, I'm going to finish off with 1 or 2 more slides, but we also have a chance for everyone to practice with number of trip groups one more time. We've got.
I don't have a poll for this one.
Okay.
So you'll just have to think in your head.
0
Put it in the
groups,
chat if you want. You can put that.
1 group, 2 groups, 3 groups. Those are your choices.
Put in the
And
chat what you're thinking.
I won't spend too much time because we do want to just wrap up and give you a heads up of what your homework is for next week. So Nancy, did anyone chat that it was 1 group?
I see a 3.
Yay!
I see a
Superstar,
7 3.
Okay, they win the prize.
I know.
Okay,
If we
this
have one, we send
idea-
it. Yeah.
This idea is that these trip groups are the same. I don't know if any of you remember Sesame Street or A Little Sister Brother. Some of these things are not like the others, right? So you're looking for patterns that are the same with no differences in the stop order. So thank you for that. Next week, as we say, Joe and Jared will be here to work with us together on common validation errors and warnings and how to resolve them, which you can. This idea of hosting, which we skimmed over very quickly, how to create a proper web link. And then we're also going to dive in for those who'd like to be sure that the route doesn't go through a pond, the shapes creation. Fares are optional, but could be very helpful. If we have fare free, we can do that very easily. We'll look a little bit at how transfers might need to be guaranteed so riders aren't left to wait an hour between buses, and our flex on-demand work around. So we'd like you between now and next week to generate 1 trip or a route, or maybe you need to meet your deadline at the end of this month and get moving along here and validate and make sure that there are no more errors, review the warnings. Maybe there are other things you can clean up and watch the video that we have for shapes. It's on our resources page, our support page, and consider doing that if you'd like. It will help you to be certain that stops are in stop order. And that's very important for your data to be helpful for riders. And then watch this demand response workaround if that's of interest to you. So you'll bring us questions next week. And we have office hours tomorrow. Go to our web page for National RTAP's GTFS Builder. There's a link that says jump in. You do not have to sign up for the Thursday office hours. Any of you who want to plan for December of 2025, please set this onto your calendar and reach back to myself or to Robin with any additional questions. So Nancy, we've got moments here, but I'd love to answer anything that is of burning need to answer before we get
Yeah,
to tomorrow's
yeah.
more
Feel free to
relaxed. Yeah,
raise your
go ahead.
hand if you've got a question, and we'll and I can unmute
Can
you. But I do want
unmute.
to, while people are thinking about their questions, I do want to remind people that the same survey that you took last week will come up. Of course, you'll pick this session too. But again, any questions or comments you have that, so we can address them next week, please enter them in that survey. It's really helpful to us.
And we know it's high speed, but you're brilliant people. You can do this, and you will slow it down at your pace, and you'll say, gee, this isn't clear to me. Reach out to myself.
Yeah.
We're a team that'll help you get anything that is unique to your agency.
Had a
resolved.
couple questions, Marcy. I seem to have uploaded my GTFS zip file every quarter through the pipeline on Google Partnership. Is there a way to have a file that shows the routes and stops regularly and then change the dates of holiday? Oops, I lost it.
Okay, I think I'm understanding. You are already at Google Maps. So you might have a stable link, or you're uploading manually. We encourage you to look at that National RTAP screen that we have here and create a web link from here. Jared talked about it as well. If you upload to this link, and we'll review it next week, but if you upload to this link quarterly, weekly, hourly, whatever day interval you have, this link will stay the same. Not this particular link. This is how to get a link. It's back here that Jared showed us. This link will stay the same, but the data behind it can get updated as often as you want. And then you can have Google also, Apple Maps, Google, any of them, point to this same link for your data. So I might have to explain it again next week, but I hope you're saying, I understand. The link is the front piece, the billboard, and behind it I can change the data so that the show is accurate and the actors and actresses come out at the right time.
Yeah. So you do have to update expired data, but you have a place to put it as many times as you need to.
And with regard to calendar, you could set your calendar for 3 months, 6 months for us in our toolkit. You can have a year's worth of calendar, so you don't have to constantly upload the file based on calendar. But you might have ways in which your drivers are getting their assignments and you do it on an interval. You could use the same web link and update the data behind.
Okay, we have a question for Jared. I'm not seeing the P50 among my list of NTD forms. We are a small systems reporter. Does that matter?
I can take this one. Kelly, thanks for the question. You're going to want to go to, if you don't see this little GTFS from the hamburger bento box, waffle iron, whatever we want. We have another way to get there through the profile, which is on the landing page. And yes, even if you're a small system reporter, you should see this. So let us know if you don't. But the profile is another way to get there. You should see profile right when you log into the NTD. And then when you click on your profile, you'll also see a little at the top, view and manage general transit feed specification P50. We have a spare minute, Marcy and Nancy. I'm happy to present that on the screen, but those are the general.
Could we wait for next week? We said we would do a little deeper dive.
Absolutely.
And this is not the first time or last time that question will come up. So thank you for Kelly, whoever you are, we applaud you because I think I've heard this before as well, that there might be a little confusion and we want to save all of you some time here. So we'll do a live demonstration of these different versions, that's flavors of getting to the P50 next week.
So,
Nancy,
To get to
other
yeah, we can
questions?
stay on a few more minutes if someone wants to jump in with a question. We're happy to, stay on for another 5 or 10
We're
minutes.
here, but we honor those who need to
Well, of
possibly.
course, yeah. So, but if not, I will just again encourage you to take the survey, do your homework, watch the videos, and we'll be back next week, same time, same link, same day. So, all right, I think we're done. And again, thank you to all of our instructors today. Great job as always. I love the little reactions. Thank you. And we will see you next week. Thank you.